So this relationship with ourselves, learning to love ourselves, it's really important we understand this is not the same thing as arrogance. They're actually two completely different things. The love of the self is genuine, absolute, unconditional love, loving ourselves the way the Creator loves us. And I don't believe in a judgmental Creator, so I think religion made that one all up to keep us actually separated from the Creator. We love ourselves with pure, absolute, unconditional love, the way Mother, Father, Creator loves us all, as divine children having a human experience. And arrogance comes from that naysayer voice. And that arrogance of, oh, I am so much better than everyone else, isn't self-love. That is an individual who feels inadequate and needs to puff themselves up and put everyone else down to hold themselves up, because they don't actually love themselves. They're in constant pursuit of external, being filled up externally. And it's impossible to fill that void that's missing, because what's missing is a genuine desire to love and feel loved and be love itself. And so arrogance will always comes from that voice, that naysayer, nagging voice that doesn't allow them to genuinely feel love or to project that love out to anyone else, because it's always from the voice of judgment. It's always from the voice of fear. Where self-love is pure and absolute. It says, I am wonderful just as I am. I don't need to put anybody else down because I am a wonderful human being. I love the path that I'm on. I love the journey that I'm on. I love that I get to be of service to humanity. I love my friends. I love that it's cold. I love that it's hot. You love it all. Because love is actually the essence of who we are. All of us are love having a human experience. And that I know is really difficult to grasp. But when you start to understand that God is love and God is all that is, therefore we are all that is, and so we are all love. Then we start to understand there isn't anything that isn't love, except our judgments and expectations that come from this naysayer negative voice.